She is dead. Yeah, just write a check. Yeah, $11,000. She was 26 anyway. She had limited value.
It's SPD officer Daniel Orderer laughing about the death of a pedestrian, Genevieve Candula, hit by a Seattle police car. This body cam video released last week has sparked international outrage and an investigation now underway from the Office of Police Accountability. All this at a time when police are at the center of a new drug possession ordinance set for passage by the full council this week. Plus, no charges will be filed in the case of the missing texts starring former Mayor Jenny Durkin and former Police Chief Carmen Best. What's the fallout from that? And who's keeping an eye on all the vacant buildings in our city? So much to talk about. These stories and a lot more coming your way this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine. My co-host is the one and only David Croman, reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I think you and I have a similar neighbor. Every time the Seahawks score, thankfully they did a lot of that this past weekend, someone detonates in my neighborhood what sounds like a half stick of dynamite. What do you have going on?
My neighbors down the street have this actually very cool, like outdoor, like theater that they built. I think they might have built it during COVID, but it like has gotten really advanced. So anyway, and like rain or shine, they're out there, and yeah, I can hear them hooting and hollering. It's actually great. I kind of enjoy it.
Yeah, can follow the game however you want to, but yeah, it does make for some interesting times there, and good for them staying out in the cold and wet, making it happen out there for the Hawks. How about that? Well, David, thank you as always for joining me. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. Our shout out of the week goes to Anson. Anson, thank you so much for being a great patron and asking some great questions that I'm working on getting answered for you. And hey, if you want to support the show like Anson and get your questions answered too about what's going on in the city, well, guess what? You can become a patron. We will send you this coveted Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker for just $5 a month for your support. And we also feature your sticker shots, action photos of your sticker on the side of the fridge, on the computer, you name it. That's on the video version of the podcast, which airs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. Thank you, Converge Media. Thanks to Anson as well. All right, let's get rolling with right here, right now. Well, the Seattle Times calls it the laugh heard round the world. Officer Daniel Orderer heard on his body cam laughing in regard to the death of Genevieve Candula, a pedestrian hit by an SPD cruiser in January. And it truly is echoing from San Francisco. A consulate general of India, Candula's country of origin, has criticized the SPD publicly, along with a slew of state and local leaders here in the Northwest. Orderer has said his comments were taken out of context, but the mayor and other city leaders met with Candula's family over the weekend and apologized for his behavior. Plus, there's an investigation now underway from the Office of Police Accountability. David, I wanted to talk about what impact a case like this might have on the SPD, because it seems like for every bit of progress we hear about, like a judge recently saying it's time to drop the bulk of the federal oversight of the department that the department's been under with the consent decree, then we have something like this happen.
Yeah, I feel like the major problem. I mean, there's a lot of major problems with this. You know, we've seen the argument that there was more context to this a few times. The SPD, or I think this officer sort of in his defense said, you know, they were joking about kind of the cold-hearted lawyer's response to this. And that's fine, I suppose. But, you know, the big thing, though, is like, not only is there a death of a person involved here, but it's death of a person at the hands of another Seattle police officer. And so, you know, this goes beyond just sort of gallows humor. It's just the exact kind of situation that, you know, in this case, the two leaders of the police union, you would want to see them sort of taking it very, very seriously. But it kind of gives the impression that when an officer kills a citizen of the city of Seattle, you know, it's still a time to be telling jokes and laughing about it. And I think you know, the context to me in some ways doesn't matter that much outside of that, because it's you know, where the sort of central problem, I think, over the last few years and really last few decades is this feeling that the Seattle Police Department is not actually being all that protective of the people in the city that they serve, and that
Yeah.
there's sort of an essential split between the people who live in Seattle and the Seattle Police Department. And um, when you hear the sort of focus of these conversations being on uh, specifically downplaying the officer's actions, saying he was going slower than he actually was,
Right.
saying he was
That.
running
Mhm.
lights and sirens when he wasn't, and then going straight to joking. It just doesn't give anybody confidence that their number one priority is for Seattle police officers to be serving the people around them.
Right. Thank you for going through all that permutation with me, because I think the other part of it is, okay, you have this officer, you have a police officers guild that's saying, well, you know what, we're not funded properly, and we need to be putting more money into police. And the big ad campaign they had, "Feel Safer Yet," after the city council made some of its decisions with regard to the police budget. There's a certain point there. Your colleague Denny Westneat was bringing it up where it feels a little bit like a shakedown. If you're not putting more dollars into the Seattle Police Department, or bringing some more officers on board more quickly, then this is what's going to happen. And that's just a really sinking feeling, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it goes beyond just, we're understaffed, because there have been sickouts and protests,
Right.
allegedly, although it's sort of hard to get anyone to actually confirm this 100% because it's
Hmm.
technically illegal. But, indications that there have been protests against sort of how the Seattle Police Department is being treated by the Seattle
Hmm.
Police Department. And so, but that what that does is that takes this beyond just, hey, we don't have what we need to do our jobs. And they're actually saying, hey, we're going to not do our jobs because we feel like we're not being respected. And that is the part in particular that I think for a lot of people feels like a shakedown, because
Yeah.
the strike is basically against the representatives of the people in the city of Seattle.
Yeah, yeah, and public safety is the primary goal of the city charter there. I guess just to wrap this up, I'm trying to figure out where this case goes in terms of the investigation. The OPA taking several factors into consideration. On one hand, Officer Auderer has been reportedly the subject of 18 investigations, costing the city multiple millions of dollars in police misconduct lawsuits over the last couple of years. On the other, Auderer says he believed he was having a private conversation, didn't really know that his body cam was on there, and the conversation was not officially part of the course of his duties. I know there's no way to accurately predict this, David, but I feel like we have to go down this path. What do you think is going to happen to this officer when it comes to discipline?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's I think one of the big frustrations with that some people have with the accountability process is it, functions within a pretty strict set of rules and
Yeah,
standards. So, um, I think that can be frustrating because if there's not like a specific rule or whatever that was broken, what I don't know.
yeah,
Maybe it exists. I don't know what the punishment for distasteful and insensitive jokes
yeah.
mistakenly recorded by a body camera is.
Right, right.
I don't know what rule in the code that violates. And so maybe something comes out of this. Maybe Chief Diaz sort of bends and fires this person, but then
Mhm.
you got to deal with the whole arbitration process, and that's a whole can of worms that we
Yeah,
could spend hours on also. So
yeah, right.
um I think I would say that there's a decent chance that this leaves a lot of people feeling frustrated and
Yeah.
uh, unsatisfied in the way that we have seen other past high profile incidents do, even specifically in the city of Seattle.
Yeah. No, it's something that I know a lot of people are keeping a close eye on, and I'm talking about at the national and international level. This really is a story heard around the world. And I wanted to talk about a related story here, David, and a big thanks to Amy Sundberg for this line of thinking here. How does a story like this impact the city of Seattle's passage of a new law? We're talking about that this week, that relies heavily on officer discretion when it comes to arresting people for drug use or possession. And I know we're recording this, David, just before the council is supposed to vote on the Tuesday vote for this ordinance. I'd be surprised if they delayed this overdue measure any further. But what do you think? Does a high profile incident like this push more elected officials into rethinking how much power they're giving police with arrests like this?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, certainly, I would say that since 2020, the pendulum has swung back the other direction. The fact that there was so much pressure at the state level and now at the city level to pass measures that make it theoretically easier for officers to arrest drug users, I think that's
Hmm.
quite the change from a lot of the conversation that was happening in 2020. And so, the like I said, the pendulum had kind of swung back towards a little more pro law enforcement stance from elected officials. If anything would pause that pendulum or cause it to go back the other direction, it might be something like this.
Yeah.
Um, the the Kandula case, um, you know, like you said, I'm sure it's going to pass the city council today. Well, maybe not
Yeah.
sure. Seems likely. And as far as what it actually does, that's any different. I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to tell because whether or not it's actually written into law or not, officers
Hmm.
have always exercised a lot of discretion about
Yeah.
who they do or don't arrest.
Yeah.
Um, so unclear to me kind of what it will actually do as far as officer behavior.
Yeah, and I guess the other part of it too, I'm just wondering how this impacts things like the budget announcement that the mayor's going to make next week. Does this lead to some changes in how funding is going to go to the police? What funding needs to go into training and things of that nature? I mean, there's a lot of different pieces moving around here, and it might seem like a small incident here in terms of something caught on a body cam, but I really think this could have larger reverberations on how the just how the city approaches its police department.
Yeah, I think it could too. In part because there was a lot of the obviously defund the police conversation in
Hmm.
2020, but that hasn't really been true for 2 years now.
Right.
That there has not really been any concerted effort to quote defund the police. No, pretty much nobody's talking about it anymore.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think that the issue is starting to. I think that blame of like the initial conversation around defund the police has started to maybe shift away, and now it's people are like Danny Westneat. I mean, he has
Yeah.
said many times he didn't agree with the conversation around defund the police, but
Yeah.
now he is starting to feel this sort of shift towards, well, maybe the police union has used that a little too long and a little too far, and there are sort of broader issues at play here, and so um, you know, again, it does seem like this could be an inciting incident to sort of um, switch some of the scrutiny and criticism back onto the police union.
Yeah, it just feels like such a big swinging pendulum here. And the other piece with the police union, of course, is the contract that's still lying out there. The SPOG, the Seattle Police Officers Guild, has not had a contract for 2+ years now. That's definitely in the back here. So you've got that. You've got this consent decree that they're trying to wrap up with the very important measure of police accountability kind of being still held over the SPD by the federal court here. And yeah, a lot of moving parts here, folks. And David, I appreciate the back and forth on this. And I know we're going to talk about it a lot more in the future here, but a profile incident that is having its impact in many different ways on the Seattle Police Department and the city writ large. All right, well, up next, excuse me, thousands of deleted texts from former Mayor Jenny Durkin and other top officials led to an investigation that we're now hearing won't lead to any charges. Why not? And what's next? That's all coming up on Now Hear This. Look back at a major legal decision from last week. Former Mayor Jenny Durkin and former Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best won't be facing any criminal charges for the thousands of deleted texts discovered during the 2020 police protest. Durkin, as you'll recall, at the time claimed she was an innocent player in this game and had nothing to hide.
I have always believed that everything I do is public as mayor and that everything's collected and archived. My emails, my calendars, my text messages. We found a gap and we're going to fix that gap.
So that idea of fixing the gap, as she mentioned there, I'm going to put a pin on that for a second. But first, David, I want to get your take on this. The decision from the King County prosecutor not to charge former Mayor Durkin or Chief Best, it really is an egregious error. I think everybody can say that, to see text like this deleted, especially during such a sensitive moment in time when it comes to the public safety of the city during the CHOP crisis there. And now it appears no one's really being held accountable. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I know that there are going to be people who are disappointed in this decision for exactly that reason, because they want to see more kind of individual accountability. The city
Mm,
is paying several millions of dollars in settlements to as a result of this. Is some level of accountability there, but as far as sort of
right.
individual behavior, I know that people wanted to see more for former Mayor Durkin and former Chief Best, and by the way, uh, Fire Chief Scoggins, who
Scoggins,
still
yeah.
has his
Hmm.
job. Um,
Hmm.
at the same time, I would be surprised if anyone is surprised by this. I think it. I mean, it is a felony to knowingly destroy public records. That
Right.
is true. And also, you had to sort of expect that a new prosecutor, because the King County prosecutor who's in office now, Manlin, is not the same one who started this investigation in
Hmm.
Satterberg, and so she was inheriting this. She's new. It would have been an insanely high profile case if
Yep.
charges had been brought against Durkin and Best. And she probably would have had to prove that it was an intentional act to do these things. So far, despite a lot of suspicions about what might have happened, that no evidence has emerged to show that definitively, at least not to the level that could be proved in a court. And so all of those things, I'm sure, kind of factored into charges not being brought. Does it? I think it's not likely to put the conversation to rest, because it's not an exoneration exactly. It's just that
Hmm.
it says the prosecutors didn't feel like they had a strong enough evidence to win the case.
Yeah, and it's a very important distinction you made there with regard to individuals being held accountable. This is something that the city has put dollars towards in terms of the defense of former Mayor Durkin and former Chief Best, as they have in the past with, let's say, City Council member Shama Sawant when she has faced different legal issues there. The city does foot the bill for that as these city elected officials end up doing their job. So that's an important distinction there. But I really did want to talk about what happens next year because I've read this in Publicola, David. The city still doesn't really have a secure server to save text messages from top officials, meaning even if we have the great policy in place, saving everything, the city really doesn't have the ability to do so, it looks like. And I know you have made requests for public documents in the past. You're doing it right now. You'll do it in the future. I guess, do you feel confident about being able to recover text messages from the phones of top city officials in the future with a public records request? I just wonder if and when something like this could happen again.
Yeah, no, I don't feel comfortable or confident that I'm getting everything I ask for. Because a lot of it, as far as I understand, a lot of it is, you request text messages, and the public records officer goes to the people whose phone it is and be like, okay, turn over your text messages.
Hmm.
I think with emails and documents, there's a little bit more of a centralized system, but it's not the case for text messages, and so it does put a lot of discretion in the hands of the people who are using their phones. Not to mention, are they using? I have had I have had text message conversations with elected officials, and I won't say who
Me too.
after a year or something of texting on one number will say, "Oh wait, maybe we should. Hey, can you start texting me on this other number, because this is my personal phone,
Yeah.
and we have communicated about city business. This isn't just like catching up on how things are going." And
Oh,
so,
yeah.
I know that it is a thing that happens where people are texting on personal phones, doing city business on personal phones, and then that really, we saw that in Councilmember Sawant's office.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of Gmail, a lot of Gmail
Hmm.
suffixes,
Which they
which
still
isn't to
have. Yeah.
say,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, which I mean, I I think as long as they, uh, make those emails sort of public record, maybe it's okay. But it just,
Right.
what that means is the discretion is on those individuals to be turning those records over. And so,
Yeah.
for someone like myself, it doesn't give me a lot of confidence that I'm getting everything, whether it's malice or just oversight.
Right.
It almost doesn't matter. It's
Yeah.
going to end up being the same result.
Yeah, public's right to know. Can you go down that path briefly, David? Like what that process is like to make that request for public records, how long it takes, things of that nature, just to enlighten people who are listening. What's that process like?
Yeah, it depends on the department. But there's a central portal, and you go and you choose the department you want to make requests from, and you basically just describe in as close a detail as you can exactly what you want. And
Hmm.
then again, with emails, my understanding is the officers can sort of search databases and search for these emails, but with text message, they are actually often going to the people and asking them to turn them over.
Right.
The city of Seattle, almost across the board, is just incredibly slow in producing records. It's not
Hmm.
quite federal government bad, but it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
um, and I'm reminded of this every now and then. I made a request to a state agency recently, and I got my records back in a week, which
Wow.
and the person apologized. The person apologized that it took a week,
Because it
which
was taking too
in the
long.
city of Seattle, it's like if you get anything within 2 months, you're doing pretty well. Um,
Mm.
it's just they're understaffed to
Yeah.
to give them some latitude. But still, the spirit of the law, the records law, I think you could argue pretty well is not being followed, especially in the Seattle Police Department, where it routinely
Yeah.
takes 6, 8 months to get anything back.
Yeah. Well, thank you for breaking that down. I did want to switch gears to something else that is happening with the council this week on the agenda. Actually, very busy as they try to jam in a number of issues before the mayor's budget presentation next week. This interesting side story about the impact of the pandemic, kind of getting a hearing in the land use committee here, a rise in the number of vacant buildings in the city of Seattle. I found this interesting. City data shows there was a 41% increase in unsecured vacant buildings in between 2021 and 2022. A 57% increase in properties with safety or maintenance violations over that same period, and those numbers are actually projected to increase this year. Plus, property owners are not paying their fees to the city for the monitoring that the city is doing to watch over these buildings. So, why is this a problem? Well, squatters come in, graffiti goes up, fires, a number of different issues. David, I just wanted to look at this whole concept. When you have this many vacant buildings, it just sounds like a public safety nightmare to me. What's your take on this?
Yeah, and it's not surprising, is my take.
Mm,
You just have to walk around the city and you see a lot more empty spaces.
yeah.
I don't know kind of what the broader approach to vacant buildings is. I know a few years ago there was some talk about using them for art spaces, but then there's
Yeah.
downsides to that also. So yeah, I don't know. I imagine it's an issue that a lot of cities are dealing with right now,
Yeah.
and a lot of questions about, are they permanently vacant, or are they or is this a temporary blip and they might start filling
Yeah.
again? I think the fact that there's not a great answer to that question probably leaves cities kind of in a limbo state of what they want to actually do with these. It's not like they can stamp them abandoned,
Yeah.
because there are still leases on some of these.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's an issue I hadn't given a lot of thought before this came up.
Nor had I. It just seemed like an interesting thing, and the council really trying to do a few things to beef this up a little bit. They're saying, all right, you can't just put the plywood up anymore. You need these cord doors on there to make sure that people aren't getting in. And they're saying, all right, Department of Construction and Inspection, guess what? You can actually file liens against these properties. You don't have to go through the court if things get really bad in terms of the back fees, etc. I guess the hope is that these buildings get taken down more quickly so they become a less of a hazard. But it almost seemed ironic to me, David, in a city that is crying out for more real estate to put in affordable housing or whatever else, they're dealing with an issue like this. I almost see this as part of that spectrum too. The land that the city has right now and the purposes it's being used for in some of these cases with vacant buildings, it just seems like a bigger problem than just, oops, that building has some plywood on it to me.
Yeah, for sure, it's a bigger problem. I mean, just big questions about especially commercial space, if that's ever going
Yeah.
to fill back up again. I think there's sort of a pipe dream of converting space to affordable housing, because it's like you said. I mean, it feels
Mm,
like a easy one to one. We need housing, and here are these empty buildings. Turns out it's much more difficult than a one to one,
yeah.
because
That's true.
people don't want to live in the center of a massive office space with no windows and no exhaust for a stove or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So it's a interesting situation that we have,
Yeah.
and a little frustrating that there is vacant space when we also need space. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know that one thing is going to solve the other though anytime soon.
That's fair. That's fair. It's one of those challenging situations that I know the city is dealing with here, and it's not that easy, as you point out, to magically turn these things into affordable housing. But it is something that I know the city's paying close attention to with this vote this week in the Land Use Committee, and we'll follow up on that as need be. All right. Well, coming up here, wouldn't be a show on Seattle News, Views, and Brews if we didn't talk about some serious issues with our state ferry system. The saga continues. David's got the story next on Transportation Talk. David, you wrote in the Seattle Times recently about yet another state ferry out for at least a month, the Walla Walla, with major propeller damage. And this is at a time when the system is getting along just barely with other ships out of commission for other damages or getting retrofitted to be hybrid electric vessels. Bottom line for me, and help me out with this, it just appears the system can carry a lot fewer people, or what's going on here?
Yeah, it feels like things are, and I hope this isn't true, starting to spiral a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been known for a while that the state needs more boats and newer boats because there are not enough of them, and the ones that do exist are really old. Um, the problem got a little more precarious, or the situation got a little more precarious because the Wenatchee and is out, as you mentioned, for the next year to be converted to hybrid electric, and each year for the next 3 years, one of the state's biggest boats is going to be out being converted. So that stretches the system even a little bit further. But then when something like this happens, where the Walla Walla breaks, which can hold 188 cars, then suddenly you got to kind of play Tetris. And so the result is on a route that, the Bainbridge to Seattle route should have 2 jumbo Mark IIs sailing back and forth, which carry about 200 cars each and about 2,500 passengers each. As things are right now, one of those boats can only carry 64 cars and only 700 people. That is a big problem because you've just lost, I don't know what the math is basically a third of your capacity on that route already.
Right.
It's getting into winter, so things maybe will slow down a little bit, but those anyone who has tried to drive on the Bainbridge to Seattle boat knows it's pretty difficult already to do. And so if you're losing 138 car spaces per round trip, basically, things could get worse pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I know you brought it up before, just about the nature of this whole situation. It's not like you can point a magic wand and say, okay, let's fix this, and bring something back online. But I'm struck by the fact that, okay, here's this system plugging along. When does it turn into that emergency for the state? Because let's think about, all right, if a third of the capacity for I-5 were shut down for a month or more, I think there'd be a pretty big hue and cry about that. Help me out with that part, because I know that's not a perfect analogy there, but I think that's what we're talking about here in terms of capacity, in terms of what's happening to these state ferry riders.
Yeah, I mean, it's a better analogy than you gave it credit, because the highway system is, I mean, the ferry system is part of the highway system. So the state sees it as a highway, which means, like you said, theoretically, if 520 is shutting down a lot these days. It's a bad, bad analogy, right. But I mean, it is considered majorly disruptive to people when the ferries don't function as they're supposed to. And, but I hate to say it, but there's just not a lot of path out right now, because neither, I mean, as I've written about in the past, the process to getting new ferry boats has been severely disrupted for a lot of reasons. We will not get a new boat until at the earliest 2027, and that even feels a little optimistic. Staffing is the other big issue, but that doesn't seem to be improving at all either. So, I haven't talked to legislators about an issue and gotten such kind of fatalistic answers as I have about the ferry system. I just don't sense a lot of hope out there that this is an issue that is going to improve anytime in the next 4 years, really.
Wow. I'm looking forward to more reporting on that, David. Thank you for breaking it down. And it is time to wrap up, my friend. And I got to ask you, does it mean I have a problem if the one search term that keeps on coming up whenever I open Google is the phrase American League wildcard standings? I have never been so interested in working out the decimals to the 10,000th level there. So much drama and a lot of math for the Mariners right now, it feels like.
Yeah, I'm the last couple weeks have been frustrating, but also I'm excited how it's going to set up the end of the season, because even if they don't literally make the playoffs, the last 2-3 series are going to feel like the playoffs, because in some ways they kind of are. So it's not going to be a relaxing few weeks, but it is going to be about as exciting as it gets.
That's true. That is true. And I can't wait to see it either, David. Thank you, as always, for joining me. Thanks to everybody listening out there to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Make sure you listen to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Please also find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon, folks. Really need you here. Show your support if you could. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media as well. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.